What's up, guys? This is Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, and on this episode, I've got your Week 4 PLL preview for Long Island. We're going to get to a couple things on this episode. First, the Cannons made a change at the stripe earlier on this week. We'll get to that to lead off the show. Then later on, I've got the Atlas figuring some things out as we move throughout the season, so we'll get to that in segment 2, and then wrap it all up with your thoughts heading into Week 4 in the PLL. So to get to this first topic, like I said, the Cannons making a change at the stripe. They announced Wednesday the addition of Peyton Smith from the player pool. The Cannons, after Week 3, 7th in the PLL in face-off percentage, ahead of only the Chaos, so obviously they needed to shake some things up there, and they did by adding Smith from the player pool. Smith had a tough 2020 bubble, facing off at 38% during the bubble and adding 9 ground balls over 6 games. And he was cut by the Redwoods this offseason in favor of guys like T.D. Erlin and Charlie Leonard, who were both drafted in this 2021 college draft. Obviously, Smith, a first-round selection in last summer's college draft. And I think it'll be interesting to see how he handles his second go-around in the league after struggling, like I mentioned, in 2020. But he takes the spot on the Cannons roster of Tommy Kelly after he went 27% with 7 ground balls in just 2 games this year. So obviously, again, a move that probably needed to be made for this club, as they were 7th, as I said, in face-off percentage so far this year. But I really think as a whole, this could be a good move for both sides involved, because when you look at it from the Cannons perspective, like I said, they needed help on face-off, and they went out and they got a guy that not that long ago went 58.9% on faceoffs, which is good for second in Marist lacrosse history and third all-time in ground balls with 215 in Marist history. So again, a guy that not that long ago was one of the better face-off guys in the game of lacrosse. Obviously, like I said, had a tough time in his rookie year last year, but then again, considering the circumstances around that season, I think that he deserves a second chance. He deserves a little bit of a break, I would argue. So like I said, it'll be interesting to see how Peyton Smith handles this second go around in the league. It'll be interesting to see if he'll be on that Cannons roster here in Week 4, or if they'll wait to put him on in Week 5 possibly. And I think for Smith, looking at it on the other side, for Smith, it gives him another shot, like I said, at the league, and to prove to people that he can play at this level against some of the best guys at that position in the world, right? Going up against guys like Baptiste, going up against guys like Nardella, like Connor Farrell, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it gives him another shot to say, hey, 2020 was just an off year for me. I'm back, I'm good, and I'm ready to take full advantage of the opportunity that I've been given to play with this very talented Cannons squad. And I think that when you look at this Cannons squad now, they have the offense nearly beating the Atlas without Lyle registering a single goal last Sunday. I thought was pretty impressive. And the defense, for the most part, again, outside of that Atlas game, I would say, but the defense, for the most part, will keep you in games, but they needed help at the stripe as they faced off, at just about 36% through the first 3 weeks of the season. So my question with the Cannons making this move and being where they were in terms of face-off percentages, when, if at all, do you see the Chaos make a move at face-off with guys like Gallagher and Adler already there, and the struggles that they've had facing off this season? When do we see them potentially make a move? Because I said the Cannons were 7th in the league in face-off. 8th in the league was the Chaos, or is the Chaos, I should say. So when do we see them make a move like this to try and get something going at the stripe and be a little more successful than where they are right now? Because they're currently at 33% on the year in terms of face-off percentage. Adler's at 38% through 2 games, but his best game out of those 2 was a 46% performance against the Water Dogs back on June 11th. And then Kyle Gallagher has been taking the faceoffs for them the last 2 games they've played. And to me, he almost kind of looks like this year's Peyton Smith, going 30% with 8 ground balls in 2 games. So you're seeing kind of statistically the similarities between those two from where Smith was in his rookie year a year ago. And like I said, Gallagher's played their last 2 games against the Archers and the Redwoods. So obviously TD Erlin, especially in that Redwoods matchup, getting the better of him there. So like I said, so when do we see Andy Towers make a move at the stripe? And I guess who would you want to see them get in that case? Now that he's available, should they go out and bring back Tommy Kelly and hope that they can revive him sort of? Or is there somebody else out there in that player pool that you would like to see them get? Because I do think sooner rather than later, a move will need to be made from where they're at currently at the face-off position, because he being Andy Towers is getting a lot of his Canadian players back now from the travel restriction list to be able to help the offense. But now I think he needs to be able to address the face-off position before season's end, because I think that's one of the things that's really holding this team back right now, outside of the fact that their first 3 games that they were just brutal with turnovers offensively. So when we come back for segment 2, like I said at the top of the show, I want to get into some more Atlas stuff and talk about how they're still sort of figuring things out. But for me personally, as an Atlas fan and being able to watch this team a week ago, I definitely think they're ahead of schedule with where I really expected them to be at this point in the season. But we'll get to that in segment 2 in just a moment. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. All right, welcome back. Taking the Field with Stevie Mack, segment 2 of 3 on the show as we head into week 4 in the PLL out in Long Island. As I said before the break, getting to this next topic, the Atlas still sort of figuring things out, but not necessarily as far from where they will be eventually than I think a lot of people expected them to be at this point in the season. The Atlas winners of 2 of their last 3, the lone loss though coming in overtime at the hands of the Whip Snakes, and really, to me, they played very, very well in that game, a lot better than I had expected going into the game. And I even tweeted this out after the game, is that while I was disappointed with the loss, because obviously you wanted the Atlas to win in that case, at least I did, but I didn't feel bad about the loss. Like, I didn't have a bad taste in my mouth the way that I did after they played the Archers in week 1. Like, I actually felt pretty good about their chances against the Cannons on Sunday in their second game of the weekend after losing that game, because of the way that they played and the way that they executed in that game against the Whip Snakes. Because in my opinion, they had every chance, every opportunity, every right, you could say, to win that game against the Whip Snakes. But obviously Matt Rambo and the Whip Snakes made one more play when it was there to be made, and that ended up being the winner. But the offense in week 3 looked really solid, averaging 14.5 goals in those 2 games. Teat had 9 points in that win against the Cannons, which gave him player of the week. And their top 2 attackmen now offensively are rookies. It's Caraway and Teat combining for 23 points, and Teat's only played in 2 games so far this year. And Baptiste, after struggling a bit in the championship series a year ago, back to more of what we expected from him at 58% from the stripe. And if he can bump that up to 60% this next weekend, he'd be the 3rd player in the PLL facing off at over 60%, I believe, because I believe Nardella's still over 60%. TD Erlin, I believe, as well, as over 60% still. So he'd be the 3rd player in the league this year currently to be over 60% for the year, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But the defense definitely does, for this Atlas team, look a lot better than previous years. Yes, they struggled against the Cannons on Sunday, giving up those 17 goals, even without Lyle really being all that involved in the offense. And you have to give a big shout out to Defensive Player of the Week Michael Rexroad for his performance in that game, locking down Lyle the way that he did. So I guess you could say that was kind of the lone bright spot for this defensive unit. Jack Kincannon included in that performance was the ability of Rexroad to lock down Lyle Thompson. But overall, I think the Atlas are really taking the steps in the right direction that they need to be making. And they're putting their system in place for some of these young guys to be successful. You look at guys like Caraway, guys like Teat, Baccaro, whoever it is, especially on offense, to be successful and to be a big factor within this offense. And no, it may not be perfect all the time. They will turn the ball over. They'll still make mistakes and things like that. The defense, as I said on Sunday, didn't play nearly to the level that I think they're capable of outside of Rexroad. But I think for most Atlas fans that I've seen on social media, you have to be happy with what they've done, especially these last 3 games, really bouncing back in a big way from that blowout loss in week 1. And I don't think that many people thought they'd be in the conversation as a top 4 team here in 2021, but that is where we are, because right now they're 5th in the PLL, and depending on how things shake out this weekend, could easily move up to number 3, because ahead of them are the Water Dogs and the Redwoods, who all 3 of them, including the Atlas, are 2-2, but the way that the standings shake out, they're just ahead of the Atlas. But depending on how those other 2 teams play and the results of their games this weekend, the Atlas, if they win, could easily jump to that number 3 spot, which is a place that I don't think many of us saw them getting to this fast. I think that was something we thought, okay, maybe 2022, probably 2023, you'll see them in that top 3, top 4 discussion, but we're here right now in 2021 having this discussion of them being a top 4, potentially top 3 at the end of this weekend team in the PLL. And I think really when you look at it, they have the pieces to make a play, not just in the playoffs this year, but to be able to actually win a playoff game. And I think realistically, they'll probably slot into that 4 versus 5 game. Take your pick as to which one they'll end up being in that one, either the 4 or the 5. But realistically, I think they'll be a 500 team, probably around that, maybe a game or so above 500. And I think you could also make a case for them being a rising team the second half of the season, with teams like the Water Dogs, the Redwoods, the Cannons kind of sliding a bit, and the Chaos still trying to figure out things, trying to piece things together, getting some of those Canadians in here into their offense and really trying to get some momentum going. And I think that they won't necessarily take down the Archers. We already know this. We saw that play out in week 1. They could, I think, possibly with a banged up Rambo and Zed for the Whipsnakes, they could potentially take down the Whipsnakes at some point if they get another shot at them. I don't know what their remaining regular season schedule looks like, but that could be a possibility sometime down the line, either this year or next year. And I think any one of those teams I already mentioned, the Water Dogs, Redwoods, Cannons, I think they could take down any one of those teams, and I would throw the Chrome in there as well. So there's still a lot of season left to play, obviously, and this playoff picture will start to really take shape over these next few weeks. But the Atlas, I don't think you can count them out of anything at this point because of the way that they played here this past weekend, and knowing that it's only going to continue getting better week after week. Guys like Teat and Caraway are going to continue getting better each and every week. The defense as well. The defense continuing to mesh together and executing the way that they need to be, led by guys like Kincannon and Durkin and whoever else, and Baptiste, like I said, doing a lot better facing off this year than he did a year ago. So you're starting to see, again, like I said before, you're starting to see that plan really take shape, and they're really starting to become the team that I think that we expected them to be by year's end. But I think they're easily about 2 or 3 weeks ahead of schedule on that right now. So I think that at least for the remainder of this season, the Atlas will be one of the more intriguing teams to watch the rest of the way, because I think they'll finish anywhere from 3rd to 5th or at worst maybe 6, depending on how things go down in the standings. Again, the score differential, a big factor in where some of these teams are ranked right now. Plus, I think they could, like I said, I think they could make things really interesting come playoff time. Maybe they knock off a 2 or a 3 seed or whatever and really shake things up during playoff time. But we got one more segment that I want to get to wrap this show up as we head into week 4 in the PLL. I'm going to get to your thoughts next, and then I'm also going to talk about some teams that you might want to buy and sell stock in heading into week 4. So we got one more segment to go. You're listening to Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Welcome back. Final segment of the show on Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. We'll get to your thoughts in just a second. I'll give you my hot and cold teams heading into week 4 as well. Got a couple comments from you guys on that one as well. But to jump right into your comments here heading into week 4 in the PLL, Jackson Paul Gavin on Twitter says, Archers obliterate the Whipsnakes without Rambo and an injured Zed. Jeff Teat puts himself in the running for Rookie of the Year. Redwoods continue to slip and fall to 2-3, and Ament becomes the front runner for MVP. So yeah, like I said, heading into week 4, getting your thoughts here in the mix. I honestly think that Archers and Whipsnakes game on Sunday afternoon, 4th of July, will be a very, very good game by both sides. I think that's one that everybody in the lacrosse world will be tuning in to watch, even without Rambo in that game. Zed probably going to be a game time decision there. And look, I mean, we saw what their offense looked like a week ago against the Chrome without those two in the lineup. Rambo left probably about midway through that game roughly. But even if Zed doesn't go, you want to see some of those other guys like I talked about on Tuesday's episode. You want to see some of those other guys that are out there make more of an impact than what they did a week ago. A couple of them combined for 0 for 11 shooting. Most of their scoring came from 3 guys. I believe it was Aslaney and Kirst, and Brad Smith, I believe, was the other goal scorer for them in that game. So you want to see them create a little more continuity offensively and not just rely on Rambo and Zed. But yeah, I think if you are missing both of them in that game, like I said, Zed probably a game time decision on Sunday. But if you are missing both of them in that game, yeah, it makes your game against the Archers infinitely tougher because of what we saw from this offense without those two a week ago. And we know the kind of defense that this Archers team brings to the table this year. Gittleman playing out of his mind, saving like 70% of his shots faced or something like that, had 3 points in their game last week, and just absolutely ridiculous performances out of him so far this year. So yeah, without those two, I think it makes that game infinitely tougher for the Whipsnakes, and puts a lot of pressure on their defense, puts a lot of pressure on Bernlohr, puts a lot of pressure on Nardella to win a couple more faceoffs and be able to give their offense more possession to try and get something going. So yeah, I definitely think that that's a game I'll be watching very closely this weekend. And he says, Teat puts himself in the running for Rookie of the Year. Yeah, I mean, after the way he played last week, after the 9-point performance we saw from him on Sunday, I'd already say he just skyrocketed himself into probably top 2, top 3 of that discussion, probably with guys like Jackson Morrill up there as well. But yeah, I think after this weekend, if he plays the way he did a week ago, you'll definitely start to talk about him a little bit more in that Rookie of the Year discussion if you weren't already after his first couple games. Ament becomes front runner for MVP. Yeah, he's having a really good year, again, quarterbacking that offense from X, making the guys around him better, guys like Manny, Holman, Schreiber, Fields, whoever it is. Yeah, I could see him definitely being in the running for that easily. And he says Redwoods continue to slip and fall to 2-3 on the year. Again, yeah, I mean, they haven't looked great the last 2 weeks, and they didn't necessarily look perfect their first 2 games, but they definitely looked like a team that was going to be really tough to beat this year. But again, they haven't looked great in their last 2 games. losing to the Atlas a few weeks ago when they were without Jeff Teat, didn't have all the pieces in place, things like that. And then they come out this past weekend in Baltimore, they lose to the Chaos. And again, Chaos struggling offensively with turnovers, struggling at the stripe with faceoffs, facing off below 40%, and they still went out and found a way to win that game. So I would consider two bad losses by the Redwoods back to back. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if they pushed that losing streak to 3 and fell to 2-3 on the year. And then you see a team like the Atlas bump up a few spots if they were to win this weekend. And jump ahead of teams like the Water Dogs and the Redwoods. And then I want to go back. Jackson did send in a comment back from Tuesday's episode, but I didn't see it until after recording that episode, so I want to get his comment in here. He said his losers and winners from week 3, he says the Redwoods and always being the most overrated team in the league. I don't know if I'd go that far as to call them overrated, but again, their last 2 games were, in my opinion, bad losses. You lost to teams that I would argue you probably should have beaten in both, right? A team in the Atlas without Jeff Teat, now one of their leading scorers in just 2 games, and losing to the Chaos when they've been struggling on faceoffs, they've been struggling turning the ball over, and Blaze has been really one of their lone bright spots this year. So I wouldn't go as far as calling them overrated, but I would say that this is going to be a big weekend for them to avoid slipping below 500 after starting the year 2-0. Then Coach Shrek says, 1, Redwood's offense figures it out and bounces back, scoring over 13 goals. Number 2, Archers drop 20 on the Whipsnakes. Number 3, Chaos beat the Cannons on the backs of efforts from Blaze and Ryan Smith. 4, Teat continues his hot streak and puts his name in for Rookie of the Year and MVP talks. So I always love when Shrek comments here because he always gives you so many different things to work with. So we're going to go through and break each one of these down. The Redwoods offense, he says, figures it out and bounces back, scoring over 13 goals. I definitely would like to see that. I do think they have the firepower offensively to be able to do that. But again, they're one of those teams where turnovers have killed them and killed their momentum offensively this year. Guys like Rob Pennell, I mentioned on Tuesday's show, has just about as many points this year as he does turnovers. So that just kills any sort of momentum and any sort of consistency that you're trying to create offensively, especially from a guy like Pennell, who is seen as the quarterback within that offense. He says, number 2, Archers drop 20 on the Whipsnakes. This one, I think, may be a little bit of a hot take here because while they are missing Zed and Rambo, so you will see them possibly struggle again a little bit offensively with the absence of those two. I'm not so sure that I can get behind the Archers dropping 20 on this Whipsnakes defense and Kyle Bernlor. So I don't know totally about this. Would I be surprised if they do it? Maybe not, because the Chrome got, 16, 17 goals, something like that on him a week ago. So would I be totally surprised if this happened? No, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see. It all depends on how the Archers come out and play and offensively how they attack this Whipsnakes defense, because they are one of those teams where they have shooters coming from every direction. And I've talked about it on several different episodes over the past few weeks that they are one of the harder teams to defend because they're just so fast. Their passing is so accurate, so pinpoint accurate that it's almost impossible to defend. And again, they just have shooters coming from every angle, every direction. They got dodgers, they got guys that can catch and shoot. They're just so fun to watch, but so impossible to defend. Number 3, he says, Chaos beat the Cannons on the back of efforts from Blaze and Ryan Smith. This will be another interesting game to watch out for this weekend. Both teams come into it 1-3. Both teams probably desperate for a win here because the Chaos will be looking to generate some momentum after their win in week 3, which got them out of the winless hole, and the Cannons will want to avoid falling to 1-4, and especially if it's another 1-goal differential, because that's how they've gotten their 3 losses so far, as I'm sure we all know. So that'll be an interesting game because both teams will sort of be playing with their backs against the wall, trying to avoid going 1-4 on the year and really digging themselves too deep of a hole to probably climb out of as we head down the stretch of this season. And then he says Teat continues his hot streak and puts his name in the hat for Rookie of the Year and MVP talks. And like I said in one of the past comments, yeah, I think that after the way that he played in his first two games with the Atlas, it definitely looks like he's going to be a fixture of this offense. They're going to find ways to get the ball in his stick and let him go to work, especially off that two-man game with guys like Crawley and Cockerton and whoever else it is that they match him up with. But yeah, he's going to be one of the legit guys in this offense. Do I think he'll put up 9 points per game like he did against the Cannons? No, I don't really expect him to do that game in and game out, but I do think that after this weekend, or maybe even after week 5, he will be in serious talks for Rookie of the Year and a potential dark horse for even MVP conversation. But I want to do one more thing as we get set to wrap up this episode. I want to give sort of my hot and cold teams, whether you're buying or selling, in heading into week 4 in the PLL. So my hot teams, my teams that are just on the rise right now, are the Atlas and the Archers, and I'll explain why. The Atlas, I think, are trending in the right direction, while teams just above them in the standings, like I mentioned before, the Water Dogs and the Redwoods most notably, are sort of trending the other direction. So not that they're a team that are unbeatable or are just so heads and shoulders above the competition that I think that they're just that much better. It's more of they're trending in an upward direction, while a bunch of other teams are trending in the wrong direction, I guess you could say. But the Archers, I think, following the loss that the Whipsnakes had a week ago, are now the team to beat in 2021 and are probably the new favorites to win the championship here this season. But I wouldn't count out the Whipsnakes just yet. I mean, it's one loss. It was bound to happen, right? You can't totally write a team like that off after one bad game when they were without their two arguably best players on the field. But the offense for both these teams are just so fun to watch now, with the Atlas getting Jeff Teat back this past weekend. And I think that the Archers defense and Adam Gittleman have been absolutely fabulous to watch this year. I've said it before. I think that this defense is probably the best one that Chris Bates has had in now this the third year of the Archers being in the PLL. And they just look so fun to watch. Like, they genuinely look like they're having fun when they play the game of lacrosse at this high of a level. But my cold teams going into week 4 in the PLL are the Water Dogs and the Redwoods. Both teams are 2-2 on the year, but I'm not so sure what to make of the Water Dogs specifically for whatever reason. But it's hard for me to read them, especially which version offensively we get from them on a game-to-game basis, because if it's what we saw from them in week 1, where guys like Steve DiNapoli were their leading scorer in that game, or you look at week 2 in Atlanta when guys like Schlosser and Ryan Brown just absolutely took over for them that weekend, it's really hard to get a gauge on them from a game-to-game basis. And a guy like Dylan Ward, especially in the cage, with all the hype that was around him from PLL fans and people pushing for him to be a starting goalie in the league, and now he gets that opportunity and has really, I think, underwhelmed me so far this year. It's just really hard to read that Water Dogs team right now, but there is really good potential for this team to be a top 4, top 5 team in the league, which they currently are. But again, like I said, one of those teams that's sort of trending in that wrong direction. And then the Redwoods have dropped their last 2 games and haven't looked all that impressive in either one of them. Even with the firepower that we know that they possess on offense and TD Erlin absolutely dominating at the stripe, it hasn't led to wins in their last 2 games, and both coming, like I said before, against beatable teams in the Atlas pre-Jeff Teat and the Chaos, who at the time were 0-3 and were just desperate for any sort of success. So I think that those are two teams that for me are trending in the opposite direction of teams like the Atlas and the Archers. And Brian on Twitter, to round out the show, says, I'm buying the Cannon stock because Shane Jackson making his debut soon is huge and frees up Lyle some. I'm selling the Whipsnakes because the injury bug finally caught up to them. And like I said, with the Whipsnakes, it's hard for me to just completely write them off after one loss because of how good we know that they are. Yes, they're dealing with some injuries to two of their better players. Rambo's going to be out this weekend. That one hurts. Zed probably going to be a game time decision most likely. But I think as a whole, it's so hard for anybody to write this team off as not having the chance and being a legitimate title contender and having a chance to go for that three-peat, which according to Jim Stagnita is never mentioned in their locker room, but having that ability to be able to go out there and have a shot at that three-peat. So I'm not necessarily cold on the Whipsnakes yet. If they lose this weekend, then even though it's to a team like the Archers, then maybe you can say, okay, they're coming down to earth a little bit. Yes, the absence of guys like Rambo and Zed hurts them big time, but still there is enough there to where they should still be able to go out and win these games without them. So again, big weekend coming up here in week 4 in the PLL. Will be very interested to see how it all shakes out here this weekend, especially that Archers Whipsnakes game on Sunday afternoon. But that'll do it for this episode of Taking the Field with Stevie Mack. Make sure to like, comment, and share on this post. Let me know what you guys think heading into week 4 on Long Island in the PLL, and we can get to it on Monday's episode when we recap the weekend in the PLL. But that'll do it for me. I'll talk to you guys later.